Okay, everyone, welcome back from lunch. I know people are still trickling in. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you, and welcome back to those tuning in on the live stream. I am eager to kick off this next general session, which dives into the importance of regional resilience and adapting procurement models for the ever-changing supply chain landscape today. So we're fortunate enough to have our illustrious Dean of the School of Culinary Arts here with us today, Brendan Walsh, who will be joining us as the moderator for this next session. Brendan is a CIA alum, a member of the James Beard Foundation, and he's led numerous award-winning restaurants over his career as a chef. Please join me in welcoming Brendan to the stage along with our panelists.
Thank you. What a great time for this session. I have to tell you, I start off with a little bit of a good news story. Usually with my team, we wait till Friday. We have Good News Friday, but good news is always good news, so let's do it. So, the Good Food New York bill passed a few weeks ago. And I have to read that because I think in our subconscious, everybody in this room definitely who have been involved in this space, always thought the lowest cost food provider is not the best for our food system, right? In the back of your mind, you always had that kind of sense and feeling. And so this bill, and I'm quoting, it prioritizes healthy food, vendors who promote community health, worker well-being, local economies, racial equity, animal welfare, sustainability, and transparency, rather than the lowest cost provider. So it gave me great happiness and hope when I saw that pass and I saw that bill. So it's a good news moment for all of us, and it leads us into hearing from key players in this procurement space. We all just met, I know Lindsay, but we all just met a few minutes ago, and we have some incredible speakers today to talk about the procurement space, from small to large farms, and all leading towards a value-based procurement model. So we will hear some strategies, and we'll also hear some stories from our panel, and then we're going to leave some time for question and answers at the end. Some of the things we hope to accomplish is how are we, to answer some of these questions, how are we rewarding more sustainable and or regenerative agricultural practices? How are we bolstering procurement opportunities from small family and minority-owned farms? How are we addressing issues like food justice and sovereignty? And how are we ensuring culturally relevant food security through regional supply chain? So today, our wonderful panelists, we'll start with Lindsay Lusher-Shute. Just give a wave. There you go. Now everybody knows you. And Lindsay is CEO, Farm Generations Cooperative, co-owner of Hardy Roots Farm. She's been working on this app for a common marketplace for farmers, retail, partnering with CIA on a wholesale platform for institutional sourcing directly from small farms. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then we have Rachel Terry, from the Director of Partnerships, the Common Market. Innovative approaches to securing procurement during pandemic and connecting small and mid-sized family farms to institutional food service as an aggregator. And Lauren Horning, National Director of Local Sourcing and Sustainability, Fresh Point, Cisco subsidiary, Fresh Produce Arm. It's developed local sourcing program nationally, how to find small and mid-sized farms and crop plan locally to reduce distance of the distribution. Helps farmers become wholesale ready, has 35 locations across the country, and can talk about scale. So I'm going to invite the panelists to introduce themselves, tell a little bit of their story, and talk a little bit about what they saw pre-COVID. And before I start that off, I just want to mention I'm not in that procurement segment, but when I'm in on kind of the end user, which is we watched during COVID the supply chain really get disrupted, where deliveries to our institute, which is very dependent on our food supplies to do our teaching, We watched things such as a delivery that was expected on Friday being told we're not only not getting it on Friday, but we're not getting it the following Friday, and may not get it to the Friday after that. And that was still subject. And then I walk in on most days to 15 shorts. Now, with 90 faculty members, when you have 15 shorted items coming in, it makes it very, very problematic to teach a class when you're missing so many ingredients. And what I was hearing from my storeroom was basically the same kind of message, that the SKUs have tightened up and that they're not carrying as many items, that they're looking for the best sale model. You know, what can we make the most money on? So it was a very stressful time for us getting through COVID and even after COVID, and I still see that we still have some of those same kinds of issues. So these conversations are very interesting to me. So I'm going to with that note, pass it over to you, Lindsay, and let you tell a little bit about your work.
Terrific. Thank you, Brendan. All right. I'm in charge now. So it is wonderful to be here at CIA talking about small farms, and small farms like the one that my husband and I run, Hardy Roots Community Farm. It's about 45 minutes north of here on the same road. I was telling the two of you, I think to some disbelief, many of the oldest and most established farms in the Hudson Valley are right here north of CIA. My other role is that I am CEO and co-founder of the Farm Generations Cooperative and Grown By, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. I think I'm starting this conversation about procurement because conversations about procurement really need to start with the farmer, right? That's where everything begins. And my mission is to help small, mid-scale farms survive and thrive in the United States and beyond. Many of you may be aware that since the 1980s in the United States, we have lost more than 500,000 farms. And the food system has grown more consolidated supply chains dependent on many much larger producers. And I think many of us, most Americans, were not really aware of the price of that shift, right? We saw less expensive prices in the supermarket, maybe things were easier to get faster, but when suddenly our supermarket shelves were empty, you had 15 shorts, right, in the storeroom here, suddenly the cost of that transformation of our food system, the loss of our family farms, was very clear. And I can say, as a retail farmer, we saw for the first time, even our neighbors suddenly come in and say, wow, thank you for doing what you do. Your farm means food security for my family, means security for my family, and thank you for being here. I think it totally changed the perspective for many of us, which was something that was frankly long overdue. So what we do with Grown By and Farm Generations Cooperative is make room for small farmers to connect directly with the retail consumer. We have a unique model where we are a cooperative, we are a farmer-owned business, and that is sort of a tried and true method of farmers coming together to get the best price for whatever it might be. It's like a survival strategy, truly, and we came together to build a technology platform to make that relationship possible. And our goal is that not only can every American find local food, that now, with our partnership with CIA, that every chef can also buy local food, and buy local food, hopefully directly from a farm when they can. There are many reasons to do this. Number one, there are many small farms, medium-scale farms, mid-scale farms, that cannot sell to a wholesale aggregator. They cannot make the economic choice to do that, and they need the better price that they can get in retail or through a direct sale. So when you are buying direct from a farm, you may be the reason that that farm can pay their mortgage payment that next month. You are part of their sustainability and their viability. And so that is just something really important to keep in mind. Secondly, when you're buying directly from a farm, you're getting that unique produce that you might not be able to get otherwise, and you're developing a relationship with that farmer that, you know, at the end of the day, I think sometimes that's what means the most to the chefs that we work with. They like, you know, talking about what are we going to grow the next season in the winter, right? And I think that that is something that can really add to your experience as a chef, as a buyer, wherever you might sort of fall in that spectrum of really being part of that community yourself.
Okay. And, you know, you bring up something that's really important and relevant because my son, who now owns an oyster farm, is really backing away from the wholesale space because it's so price pushed. So he, you know, his thing is, I've got to stay in retail. So how does that small farmer, you know, that's a big challenge for small farms, definitely. So I'm going to pass the microphone now, and we'll hear from our next guest.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thrilled to be here and excited to be talking about how institutions can be leveraging their purchasing power to drive meaningful impact with local and regional family farms, and in particular with small and diverse family farmers. So the Common Market is a nonprofit local food aggregator and distributor with a mission to connect small and mid-sized family farmers with the communities who need good food. We do that work currently in 4 regions across the country. We have a Mid-Atlantic hub that's based out of Philadelphia, a Southeast hub based out of Atlanta, Texas, because it's Texas, based out of Houston, and most recently Great Lakes, based out of Chicago. And in each of those regions, we are doing the work to build relationships directly with family farmers and producers who are interested or have the capacity to sell wholesale, and then doing the work to build relationships with values-aligned buyers who are interested in moving their purchasing dollars towards those local food systems. And through that, building the transparent connection and relationships that allows those farmers to thrive and also allows us to increase access to those goods for food service operations. So how do we actually do that work? As I mentioned, we have an established and growing network of small and mid-sized producers who we support in wholesale readiness, things like food safety, quality, access to these markets. Some farmers who can't sell direct but are interested in accessing these markets but need infrastructure and other support to get there. And then we provide physical and social infrastructure to make those relationships possible. In each of our hubs, we have a physical warehouse space. We own our own fleet of trucks that are picking up product from farms, aggregating that product, and then making deliveries directly to communities. And then importantly, we also have a team of individuals that are spending the time at conferences like this, understanding bid processes, procurement processes, so that our farmers can spend their time in the field, and we can do that work to understand what market access looks like and how we can really translate that in a way that our farmers can understand and can build their businesses in a way that meets the needs of buyers like many of you in the audience. And then ultimately, we provide easy and efficient aggregation and delivery directly to loading docks so that you can access a whole network of family farmers through one truck and one invoice. So that's the work that Common Market has done, but what I'm excited to be talking a little bit more today and through the discussion is a program that we developed and is a direct response to COVID-19. As was mentioned, you know, we all through the pandemic, many of us in this room knew before, but the pandemic elucidated for many of us just how fragile our food system is. And as an organization that was responding in the moment and thinking about how can we plan differently into the future, we were thinking about how can we build more consistency and reliance between our buyers and our suppliers. And so came our Forward Commitment program. This was really a program that was built on how can we bring more small and in particular diverse farmers into the wholesale market? How can we make them more wholesale ready and translate their needs directly to our buyers? You can imagine if we have a chef calling us one day and asking for 10 cases of carrots one Monday, and then next week 100, and then back down to 10, that fluctuation is incredibly challenging for small farmers. And so taking a step back and going upstream and working with a network of farmers that are values aligned and saying, what can you grow, or what would you have the capacity to grow if you knew that you had a committed market for that product? And actually coming up with those crop plans and then talking with partners, many partners that we have here in the room today, about what would it look like for you to commit to that product before this grower even puts seeds in the ground. And you're fundamentally reshaping the dynamics of how growers are interacting with wholesale markets, and in particular, institutional markets. What that allowed us as an organization to do is to aggregate all of those forward commitments and come to a grower and say, I now can give you a purchase order before you've put seeds in the ground, before you've hired your team for the season, before you're thinking about your infrastructure investments, and you know exactly where that product is going. You have a committed market. That's a hugely powerful thing to be able to come to a grower and talk about. And as an organization, we also shared, as a nonprofit organization, we shared in that risk, in that we gave up to 50% of the value of those purchase orders up front to the farmers in the form of a purchase order loan program, a 0% interest loan program, where we were able to share in the cost of what it might take, especially for a small farmer, to make investments to serve the scale of an institution. And so that is a model that we've been practicing and learning over the past 3 years. I think for our institutional partners who are part of this program, they've been able to become meaningful investors alongside us in what a local food system could really look like. It allowed them to know product was coming in, to menu plan accordingly, and to really inspire, I think, a new sort of relationship with the local food economy. So excited to dig in more on that, but that's just an overview of a program we've been working on since the pandemic.
That is super exciting to hear. It really is. I'm going to pass it to Laura and tell your story.
Perfect. Hello. It's always hard to follow up after lunch, so hopefully everyone's digesting. I'm probably the one that you're most not expecting to hear from. It's not typical, and many have said earlier today how the traditional industrial food system needs to change. And I'm hoping to shed some light on how much impact customer focus on local sourcing can truly impact the larger industrial system at large, with myself being one of those outcomes of really customer impact. So my name's Lauren. I have a background actually in agriculture. So I grew up on a small hobby farm in central Pennsylvania, and left to go to Argentina to work on farms to prove to myself that I could farm without the impact of my dad. And then found that my dad was a phenomenal farmer when I came back to the States. And I ended up on an urban farm in Pittsburgh and eventually moved down to North Carolina, where I started working for a family-owned produce distributor for about a year. I joined FreshPoint in 2016 with the focus on finding small and mid-sized farms and building out that local program that so many of us have talked about and dreamed about for so long. That was really my dream in 2016. So figuring out how from the inside can we work in the industrial food system and bring to light what we hope can be the change. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. And from the perspective of COVID, what we saw was really the community focus that many consumers had has filtered into the space of kitchens and allowed local sourcing to surge now more than ever. The 80s, the 90s, yes, local food was a focus, but now we're starting to see we need reporting, we need more transparency. We're digging into the next level of local sourcing, which is really exciting. And on the farmer side, a lot of farmers saw many consumers go to their farms for farmers markets or CSAs, and coming out of COVID, they lost a lot of that extra drive. And so we heard from so many more farmers that wanted to change who their traditional sales outlets were and start to look at other options for sales, like distribution or selling into other platforms, be it a tech platform or selling direct to consumer, but something that diversified how they were traditionally selling. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is how our local program is seen by farmers, as well as what that impact is on the chef side. So first, we'll look at the farmer side. Virtually, here today with us, I'm a story person, so today up on the left-hand side, we have two farmers, Connie and Millard Locklear. They are part of a Lumbee tribe, which is a Native American tribe in southeastern North Carolina, Lumberton, North Carolina. Connie and Millard started working with FreshPoint about 7 years ago. They were one of the first farmers that I got to start working with when I started working with FreshPoint. And they didn't know what to grow. They've sold at farmers markets, and Millard wanted to be able to leave his job at DuPont and be a full-time farmer. And so he had also gotten cancer after working at DuPont, and so he wanted a way to work at the farm. And so we started to look at what are specialty crops that we can crop plan out with Connie and Millard so that they could have that higher end value of a commodity, but still have the assured volume that we could take in our warehouse. So we crop planned watermelon radishes and Japanese eggplant with them, crops that we typically stock, and they sold us about 10 to 15 cases a week, depending on what they had available. And they still do. 7 years now, they're still growing watermelon radishes and Japanese eggplant. And it's really kind of the epitome of when we work with local farmers, that's the goal. How can, at large, industrial food systems take what they typically stock and provide that volume and a price point if it works for the farmer, which is typically a higher price point for specialty commodities, and make sure that works for the farmer. And if it does, then stock those products. So that's what we work to do with local farmers through crop planning. Another way we work with local farmers, which Connie and Millard are part of this, is we have a local farmers insurance program. So farmers can come to us with any level of insurance, and we supplement that insurance up to $2 million, $4 million general liability policy. That allows us to sell those commodities to any level of customer, because there are customers that specifically ask for us to show the level of insurance that we have with our farmers. The third piece, which also we do with Connie and Millard, is they wanted to sell to a university that's 8 miles from their house, and the university happens to be a contract that FreshPoint holds. So one of the ways that we started to work together as well on the crop planning side was we sat down with the chefs and said, how do we provide products that the chefs could use at the university, but that we can still use on the FreshPoint contract? So we worked through that, but the farm is 2 hours south of our warehouse. So we use our trucks when we deliver to the university. The truck passes by the farm, picks up, takes back to get food safety certified and abide by the contract, and then we deliver back to the university. Yes, that may seem bogus to have product brought all the way back to the warehouse, but it fits local into the food system and makes it just that much more able to file into the program that already exists. So backcalling is a piece that we do offer. Typically about 40% of the farms in each FreshPoint site ask for a backhaul. And then outside of that, we're gonna look at the other two pictures of berries. Our local program right now is starting to expand into non-plastic packaging. So we're currently working with about a 100-acre Latino farmer in Pajaro, California, and he has grown berries for many, many years. He's a second-generation farmer, and what he's starting to look at is how can he introduce a product that's different, that differentiates him from other farmers in the market. And so we looked at non-plastic packaging. We studied this for 2 years, and this is the first year we're finally stocking his products in 2 FreshPoint warehouses that are both about 50 miles or so from the farm, and that's what those berries are from. We just got those in. Those pictures were taken in May. And moving forward into kind of where is food going, regenerative agriculture is a big question. And so we are starting to work with farmers on what is regenerative agriculture, what are the practices, how do we talk about outcomes. Still much more to come on that, but I'd say that's the future that we're looking at. On the customer perspective, this is what customers see when they work in our local program. So each site sends out a weekly local list, which has the products and the farm names. We do have a local website. If you want to pull out your phone and look up local.freshpoint.com, you can define local. We define it as 250 miles, but you can set your own definition. And then we have farm bios for any of the farms that we work with. We also have, just as of last month, we released some identifiers on our online ordering website, where customers can select a filter for locally grown or organic, and it'll pull up those items and filter down the order guide. So hopefully working in the industrial food system, yes, it's challenging, sometimes it's messy, but ideally it can make a big impact. And I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about that.
Great. Thank you very much. So we have Slido, if there's any questions from the audience. So we have Slido. If anyone wants to ask a question to any of the panelists, and I will put them up, but I'm going to start off with a question to the panel, and anyone can pick this one up. And I guess this is more a question for you, Lindsay, but what's changed on small farms since the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic? What have you seen?
Well, as I was mentioning, I think that the attitude of consumers has dramatically changed. I think it was like an alternative universe during COVID for a small family farmer, to be quite honest. We have a retail farm store. We deliver our products all around the region through subscription CSAs, but we also have an on-farm store that was very sleepy and kind of like just breaking even. And then COVID hit, and it just, it just transformed everything. Suddenly we were like, actually we had so many orders, we couldn't accommodate them in the store. So we turned our store into like a pack house, warehouse, and then have had all of the orders just picked up outside. And so that was just kind of a remarkable moment to see people really look differently at local food, that it was not just a luxury, but it was a necessity, and it was really important. And I think just that time at home cooking, experiencing local food has changed attitudes in a way that I think we've all seen, that now people, some of the sales have softened for local farms, but they're still stronger. We're still way ahead of where we were pre-pandemic. And I think the challenge for farms and for all of us who care about this space is how do we keep that going within the consumer community?
I'll just add, if I can, I think oftentimes in a lot of the conversations that I might have with a buyer and in many local programs, sometimes people are hesitant to believe that local can actually be a meaningful part of their procurement and sourcing strategies. The pandemic demonstrated just how much local food systems can do. In a time when our supply chains broke, and frankly, a lot of resources and funding came out of USDA, we saw remarkable work coming out of local and regional food systems and community organizing to support that. Common Market did more volume in 2020 than we have since 2020 and prior to 2020. There is so much potential within local and regional food systems. And like you said, Lindsay, I think the challenge for all of us in this space is how can we continue to work with the buyers and the demand in the market to keep that level of activity going. And that's the way that we're going to build more redundancy, more resiliency in the food system. It's possible. I think the pandemic, at least for myself and many in our organization, it broke down a lot of the barriers that I think we might have had before about what the potential really was. And if these farmers are ready, and it really just takes the markets to help make those connections.
So we have some great questions that have been put up. So I'm going to start with this one. It's interesting. What kinds of forward contracting works for farms and buyers? How are buyers protected if something goes wrong with the crop? So
I cover that. Forward contracting is very similar to the watermelon radish and Japanese eggplant example I gave with Connie Millard of New Ground Farm. One of the key things on why we need to forward contract is to shift away from non-local supply, West Coast supply, Florida supply, Washington State. There is a risk for a farmer if it's anything beyond a handshake agreement. If a formal contract is written, such as the contracts that, say, large distributors go into with West Coast growers, those contracts are written that if a farmer can't comply with the contract, that farmer is expected to be able to source elsewhere to be able to find volume. And that's not what we want to do for local farmers. So ideally, we want to be able to take a hit on either the distribution side or that middle ground side, that the farmer is still at the forefront of the negotiation of the agreement. And we always need to keep that in mind, that the farmer, whatever happens, is always going to be the one that's going to get hit the hardest. If they have a crop failure, well, crop insurance typically doesn't cover specialty crops. And so the farmer is impacted substantially. So when we look at forward contracts, we always have to have an idea in the back of our head of, okay, can we have the volume? Can we make sure that we have the volume for that specific commodity? And then on the back side, if the farmer doesn't come to us, and if the farmer comes to us and says, hey, I had a bug infestation and I no longer have my mustard grains for you. Okay, how do we have other suppliers that are either growing that or that we know of? And so we're always looking to find redundancy, because redundancy impacts the resiliency of the entire supply system. And so ideally, it's being able to work with farmers and know in advance. If you can let us know as far in advance, 2-3 days, great, we can look to find other supply. If that's not possible, then either being able to take the hit ourselves and sourcing elsewhere, or hopefully having open-mindedness within the end consumer to say, listen, this didn't happen, a farmer had a difficult issue, and this is what we're left with. That if we want to truly source locally, we're gonna have to be able to do that, because we can't just buy a truckload of product from Peru and think that that's gonna be okay. If we want high nutrient density products, at the end of the day, if it comes down to it, ideally the middle person can figure out a way, but we don't want the farmer paying an end result for something they couldn't control. So there is a chance that the buyer may have to change their end menu if the middle person can't figure out what to do.
Great, thank you. It hits on this next question that was kind of adds to that one. In addition to forward contracts, what other models have you seen and tried? Whole harvest contracts, and what are the pros and cons? I think you kind of hit on that a bit.
I'll jump in a little bit on that too. Whole harvest contracts, I think, can be more detrimental to a small farmer than what it sounds like they could be. And we saw that with COVID. When farmers have partnered 100% with a retailer or a distributor and said, you know, this person's gonna take 100% of my crop. When I work with farmers, I typically tell them, you know, have diversified markets. Work with not just one distributor, work with multiple distributors. Have a CSA, have a farmer's market, because if that farmer is growing something for one customer, and who knows what could happen, another pandemic, the customer backs out, an event's canceled, whatever happens, the farmer is the one that assumes all risk. And so every farmer should be able to think through, if I'm gonna have a whole harvest agreement, who's gonna be my backup? And I would actually say, not having a whole harvest agreement, be it 60%, 70%, but we as the buy side, chefs, distributors, anyone who's buying product from a farmer should consider that. I've talked with chefs who wanna go in and work with a farmer on an heirloom specialty variety of potato, where the chef procures the heirloom variety of potato, gives it to the farmer plants it all, and then is supposed to give everything to the distributor to sell back to the chef. And what happens if there's a crop failure and the chef doesn't get those potatoes? And what happens if the chef loses his job or moves jobs, and now that's no longer expected? So I would really push us on the buying side not to go into and push farmers into whole harvest agreements, because we should be thinking about how do we reduce risk for the farmer. And sometimes that's not always giving them tons and tons of business. It's thinking through in advance, how do we help save that relationship and make sure it's sustainable for the long term?
Yeah, the chefs have a huge place in this space because, you know, the best way that chefs can help out is working with small farms, is allowing small farms to sell what they can on the retail space, because that's where they're going to get their highest price. And then the chefs can step into the space where products that they can't move in that retail space, that, you know, maybe braised cuts, et cetera, you know, secondary cuts that the market isn't familiar with, that those chefs can use. And that's where chefs can really be a big help in you know, especially small farms. So that's something we're kind of working on together with this grant project. So The next question I have is, how do you address the paradigm of rebates as a driver of institutional food service profits within these programs designed to support local farms?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tricky one for, I think, many organizations in this space that are looking to support small farmers and to support transparent food systems. You know, we recognize within the institutional space that rebates are a part of the way that a lot of food service runs. And I think every organization takes a different approach to that. I think just being aware of it's much more challenging for small farms, nearly impossible for small farms to play in that space. And so I think considering what some of those programs look like and who that continues to leave out of market opportunities, you know, is just, I think, a critical piece in the whole landscape.
Anybody else? Any comments? Okay. I have another question. How does FreshPoint integrate with its parent company, Sysco? Am I able to buy local produce through Sysco too?
Great question. So FreshPoint and Sysco have separate warehouses, and different Sysco's are not always in a FreshPoint market. So there are 34 FreshPoint warehouses, but there are many, many more Sysco warehouses. And so typically I would say reach out to your Sysco rep, whether it's an account executive or a sales consultant, and see if you can get those commodities, see what's available. You can ask them if there's a FreshPoint house locally, and just see what that relationship is, what's available. We are trialing something that I'm really excited about this year in the Carolinas, where Sysco typically is on a summer veg contract, which would be like yellow squash, zucchini, tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplant. And typically they would buy those from whatever source they would be on contract with. We got a green light this year for Sysco to break that contract and source all of that veg through FreshPoint, which is acting as an aggregator from local farms. In the Carolinas, they source from about just over 100 mostly small and mid-sized farms. There are a couple large-scale farms like sweet potato farms. And that's a model that I think can really succeed internally on the Sysco FreshPoint side, where FreshPoint can be the aggregator for local farms and distribute those products into Sysco when they're stocked. Every site location is going to be different though. So I would suggest reach out to whoever you work with on the Sysco side, or reach out to me. I'm happy to help. And we can look to see what's the best way. Most chefs are looking for in-stock products. So that's really the biggest thing that we're up against. In FreshPoint, our local program has a lot of specialty unique crops. So some of those will be pre-order from a farm. Say if a farmer is selling patty pan squash at a farmer's market, we don't know if we're going to sell any. We would list that as a special order, and it would take a little bit longer to get to Sysco, but we can still get it. And so I'd say looking at stocked items is always going to be faster to get into the kitchen, but that whole program's available, everything that FreshPoint does, into the Sysco site, because if they're within a close logistical market, they're typically going to get a delivery once or twice a day from the FreshPoint site. So reach out, happy to help. It's a great question.
The next question, for the common market, are you still able to focus on food safety, quality, inspections, traceability, and recalls, et cetera, that is communicated to the end user?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think it's a really important point, and something especially within the institutional food space that has often left small and local farmers out of those opportunities. You know, at Common Market, it became very clear for us early on as an organization that was rooted in trying to serve institutions that we needed to invest heavily in food safety programs. And so our full leadership team, our food safety practitioners, all of our warehouses are SQF certified. But I think more importantly, the work that we've had to invest in alongside our farmers to get them GAP certified, in particular for produce farmers, and to ensure that they are holding the levels of food safety that are needed to access the institutional markets. That's been a huge lift and a huge investment on behalf of our farmers and us as an organization. And I think part of that work is also demonstrating to farmers, if you invest in a food safety program like this, here's the access to market that you might be able to get that you otherwise wouldn't have. And again, just to this room of buyers, being able to translate that in dollars to a producer. I mean, for a producer to take on a food safety program like that, it takes time and resources. And unless you can match that with meaningful investment in purchase orders and not just marketing and storytelling, but real meaningful dollars, that is when we can have a much different conversation with growers about the why on those food safety programs. And so it's definitely something that's challenging, and there are farms that we have pipelines towards food safety programs with, but we work with many of our farmers on that. We provide consultants free of charge to them. And we recognize, I mean, I think that's a huge challenge and barrier for many small farms, and it's rooted in being able to match that with what the market opportunity could look like.
I think I just wanted to point out also that many small farms have really upped their game when it comes to food safety over the last decade, thanks to the Food Safety Modernization Act. So some growers may not be GAP certified, but they may have FSMA inspectors coming to their farm, and that's almost there. So I think that the expectation from the USDA has really changed over the last so many years to help small farms develop systems that are more food safe.
Yeah, I have a great question about, as corporations try to be more sustainable and offset their greenhouse gas emissions, do you see there being opportunity for local farms to be part of that, offset initiatives?
So offsetting emissions, I think part of that, the question might be based in Scope 3 emissions. I'm going to start off this answer by tying in regenerative agriculture, but also giving a suggestion on regenerative agriculture is often linked with decreasing Scope 3 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, GHG emissions. The newer research that's coming out from soil scientists right now is showing how carbon molecules and the soils are not necessarily a sink. We can't necessarily pull down immense amounts of carbon and think that it's going to stay in the soils for millennia to come. The soil microbes that are based in the soils, they're very voracious, and so they will eat through carbon molecules and larger molecules very quickly. And so yes, there are photos, if you've seen on social media, the photos of the grass and the prairie lands, where it's a half cross section of the grass and you can see how deep those root systems are going. Yes, there is an impact and a great potential in livestock grazing systems and in perennial crop systems, potentially with tree fruits, although very little research has been done on tree fruit crops with greenhouse gas emissions. When it specifically looks at produce right now, no-till operations, which are traditionally being linked with lower greenhouse gas emissions, no-till essentially at some point, typically between 6 and 10 years, still has to till the soil, even if it's in the top 6 inches of soil, to be able to lift up compacted matter, even if a farmer's using a broad fork, which is basically a large instrument which has tines, you put it into the soil and release. The moment that soil is disturbed at all, that carbon's released. So it's a very fine line between regenerative agriculture, which has practical outcomes and can have very unique ecosystem benefits on nutrient density of food and on being able to improve the resiliency of that specific farm and our ecosystem and food at large. But regenerative agriculture can't necessarily be linked with looking at lower greenhouse gas emissions. Now, when we're looking at local, about 5% of logistics are greenhouse gas emissions. So we can look at local by potentially reducing greenhouse gas emissions by about 5% in the food products. And so I would say that alone is a great reason to help higher ups and help convince leadership that yes, local is important. It can lead into Scope 3. And I would just say focusing on the logistics side is going to be much more impactful than, say, focusing on the regenerative ag side at this point.
I would just like to follow that up by saying there is significant benefit to regenerative agriculture, specifically when it comes to raising livestock. And like when you're talking about rotational grazing and raising animals on pasture, there are significant benefits. So I think the extent to which you want to invest in those systems. I mean, there's a lot of information out there right now, and some of it is hard. It's very technical, right? And it's like, is the soil releasing the carbon, and when is it releasing, et cetera. But I think overall, the system of agriculture that is really working in harmony with our planet and is working to build soil carbon and create a food system that is producing healthy air, water, soil is one that is worth investing in.
So many great questions coming up. So, and you're doing fabulous answering them. Lauren, quick question. What percentage of FreshPoint business is local arrangements with customers? I see a lot of non-local products in your locations' websites too.
Yeah, so about 10% of our sales nationally are local. As a produce distributor in the typical produce industry for decades past, yes, the main part of the company is non-local. And I'd say being able to change the FreshPoint system, I'm more of an internal agitator, and being able to say, we need to do this, we need to shift here, it doesn't happen overnight. And to be able to go warehouse by warehouse by warehouse and invest in people who can help see that through, it takes time. So yes, we're still gonna buy bananas and oranges and pomegranates when customers are looking for pomegranates. I think the benefit of that is we know how much we are going to be buying week over week for the past 2 years. We have that data. So when we can look and say, okay, this crop can grow in this local area, we've got, we'll go Easter egg radishes. Easter egg radishes, root crop. If we've got soils for a root crop, basically if we don't have 100% clay, we can grow root crops well in this area. They can grow almost anywhere in the United States. So how do we take those volumes that we know we've stocked for April and May around Mother's Day and Easter, and take those volumes and shift them to local farmers? On the same mindset, those crops are gonna ride on the trucks with a customer who's already getting their regular produce delivery. So that's kind of the mindset. How do we know what volumes we have and start to change that? Make sure we find the right farmers for it too. Not every farmer wants to grow Easter egg radishes, so they don't have a diversified market for it. So yes, you're gonna see non-local crops within FreshPoint. This is, the business isn't all local. And I wouldn't wanna be up here to tell you that. There's still gonna be non-local product. The goal is how do we look to change that in time, find more farmers, help more farmers see that there's a market, and make farming a more viable business. There's a lot of folks right now that don't wanna go into farming because they don't think it'll pay. And so I think it's building that up, building up the dialogue that we can help make farming a sustainable business for the long term. And it takes these small pieces, the chess pieces, to align to do that.
Now for something completely different, I like this question because I think it's kind of amusing. When working with university dining services, have you found it easier to work with self-operated or contracted campuses?
Great question. Trick question, perhaps. I mean, they both have their areas of influence. I mean, I think we recognize institutions hold a lot of power. A lot are run by managed companies and a lot are self-op. At Common Market, we've had to learn how to work with both, and we value our partnerships with both. I think it does all come down to what are the values of the institution, and that is true if it's a self-op institution or if it's a managed company institution. We spend a lot of time learning alongside institutions, and we know that if at the top of that institution, local and resilience and social and diversity values matter, that we're gonna see that if it's a self-op institution and if it's a managed company institution. The supply chains of third-party managed companies are a challenge, and they're one that we have learned to work alongside. I think for small farms in particular, accessing them often happen through aggregators like the Common Market and others. But it comes down to me about making sure that everyone's aligned on the values.
I'm going to stick with you for another question that came up. Does Common Market assist procurement and larger institutions with navigating the restrictions of the bidding process to procure from these mid-size, larger farms?
Yeah, so we, again, as an organization rooted in figuring out how we can work with institutions, we work with many public institutions and have had to learn what it looks like to bid on opportunities or to look at contracts and have real conversations with the individuals writing those contracts about the language that may or may not be in those opportunities that would allow local farmers to meaningfully participate. And some of that is based on policy and legislation. And you started our whole panel with the great news about the New York Good Food Bill, which is meant to address some of the legislative barriers to writing better contracts. But we've had to spend a lot of time as an organization learning what does it look like to respond to bids? How can we work with the individuals who are writing those bids to think about the biases that they might not even know about, the contracts that they've maybe been writing year after year and not really deeply looking into it and saying, hey, when you wrote this spec in this way, did you consider that a small farm might not be able to respond to that? We had an instance where it had white eggs. And we had to go back to the buyer and say, would you consider saying white or brown eggs? Because now our local supplier had brown eggs, and now we could bid on that opportunity. And so again, I think it comes down to building those relationships and having honest and good conversations about what are those metrics of change and influence. And procurement opportunities are incredible. They're the original forward contracts, right? You win a procurement opportunity and a farm and an operation knows that they are delivering X amount of product every week. And that has a huge impact on an operation, and writing contracts in ways that facilitate that is really powerful.
There are so many incredibly great questions in here. There is a question, though, for Lindsay and I about how CIA has navigated working with Grown By, and can you share more about the project and the wins for both organizations? Lindsay, why don't you start by telling them about the grant process and what we were working on?
Sure. So the Grown By platform, which is you can visit grownby.com or it's on the App Store. It's really a retail platform, and that's where we went first because that's where most of the farms that we presently work with, that's where they sell. They sell direct to consumer through CSA, through subscriptions, delivery, et cetera. And what our farmers asked us to do is to sell wholesale. They already have their inventory on our system, on the app, and they want to make a different sort of catalog available to wholesale buyers. And to be able to build that separate marketplace, we needed a partner to work with. And we were grateful that the Culinary Institute was interested to work with us to sort of examine an issue that they were facing, which is how do we get more local food into this school? And so basically we're using the development of this Grown By marketplace, wholesale marketplace, as an opportunity to learn from each other. I think CIA is learning a lot about like the needs of farmers who are wanting to sell to the school and what their requirements are. And we're learning a lot about the CIA and what it takes to get local food or any food into as many test kitchens and classrooms and to chef faculty, which is just an enormous undertaking.
Yeah, the great news is that we buy a lot of food.
You do buy a lot of food.
So the tough news is how do we get that to be more locally produced, right? And so we're in the research part of this project, and we hired a wonderful farmer named Betsy Ho. I don't know if she's in the audience right now, but she's been living in the CIA, understanding its systems and how things work here. So this is a big moment, a great inflection point for the CIA, because we're at a time where we're really taking a look at how we operate and thinking about new ways for us to operate. So she gave me a whole list of challenges that we have to face down. And, so we're gonna go step by step and figure out how we can move these things forward. So I think this is interesting for you to hear. So I'm gonna read some of them, some of the challenges that we see that we have to face. Chefs need more information about what is in season locally and what is available. And I think that goes for all, segments of the food service. Training teaching, learning, conferences such as this. Another one, the Teaching Kitchen curriculum uses the same ingredients throughout the year, regardless of local seasonality. We need to change some of that, but we also, we can use that as a tool for farmers to know what they can grow for us. So there's opportunity within those spaces, those challenges. Chefs and storemen are concerned about the reliability of farms to deliver dependably. That's a concern that we have to think about, and we need that product. We can't put a teacher in with 18 teenagers with knives and say, we can't deliver your stuff. You know, they have enough going on. Farmers are difficult to get a hold of and are not organized in their sales communication. That's been an inherent problem for chefs for years, right? You're in the farm, we're trying to cook at that moment when you're doing your thing and we're doing ours. So it's always been one of those issues. So aggregators are really important. Ordering from local farms means larger orders at one time, more predictive ordering, and longer lead times. This may be challenging for chefs who need more responsiveness. Meeting order minimums of local farms, another challenge point for us. Incompatible delivery schedules, so that's why, again, the importance of aggregators. This is a key area for me, and something I just want to, mention that we know that we need to work on. Lack of storage, cold and freezer, and insufficient storage and wash areas in kitchens and restaurants. Now, it's inefficient if we want to do more work with local farms. It's extremely important that we have more freezer space. There's a lot of things that we can do with local products when we can ferment, when we can think about using products at peak season and freezing them and holding them for other points. So there's a lot of things that we can do. But I got this red light flashing at me, man, and I think they're going to pull the hook out on me any minute, so I'm going to get us done. I want to thank all of our panelists. Incredible discussion. We're going to have breakout sessions coming up soon, so you can talk a little bit more about some of these subjects. Great questions, everybody. Thank you very much.